welcome once again to the Life in Recovery podcast, Arlina Allen, author.
I finally joined the ranks.
Author. So tell us about your new book then.
So it's called The 12-Step Guide for Skeptics, Clearing Up Common Misconceptions of a Path to Sobriety.
Yeah,
And
I can
it's
see
coming
it there in the
out.
background.
There it is.
There
Ta-da!
it is.
Yeah,
The beautiful cover.
man,
Yeah.
that
How
was
how how was the journey of writing and publication and then kind of like getting on the marketing side of things? How has that been?
so this. I didn't want to write this book. I thought I was gonna write like the great recovery memoir. I had all these illusions of grandeur. And what ended up happening was is so I published just over 350 episodes. I'm not quite sure the exact number. But what kept coming up, when I would talk to people to interview, I would do like a little pre-screen before I interview people, and I ask if they're 12-step oriented or not, because you know how it is. Like people that are 12, some people that are 12-step oriented are sensitive about, how they share. So I always want to be respectful of that, whatever, traditional 11. And but when I people said that they weren't 12-step oriented, I couldn't help myself. I'd be like, how come? And I would hear a variety of, I hate to call them excuses, but reasons that they decided not to try the 12-step process. And whenever I heard something, I would think, to myself that that's not really a valid reason not to do it, right? Because there is a path around every obstacle. And what I realize is there's a lot of recovery resistance. There's a lot of resistance to change, right? And so I think it's so important. I write about recovery resistance in the book, but I think it's so important to, maintain that, the how mentality of honest, open-minded, and willing. But anyway, I wrote the book because I just couldn't take it anymore. It's like people were giving me all these reasons why they couldn't do 12 step. And I was like, look, let me just put it out all on paper and describe why your obstacle is not really an obstacle.
Did you find that you had resistance to the program when you first got sober?
100%. I was a skeptic, right? Like I was 24, 25 years old, and I was in this job where I was meeting a lot of different people. I was a sales rep for transportation companies, so I would go around to these different manufacturing mostly. And I was making fr my saw my job was making friends, and I met this guy Mitch, and he was sober. And we'd go out to lunch, and I'd order a glass of wine or a beer, and he would order soda. And I don't know how it came up in the conversation, but he started sharing his experience, strength, and hope with me. And one day I was sitting in his office because I was having all these what I would call escapades in my early 20s. I'd have all these episodes where I'd wake up the next morning and be like, oh my God, what was that all about? Like the night before, I was so confused. Anyway, I'd share the stuff with Mitch, and one day he had these steps on like a little sheet of paper and he slid it across the desk and he goes, what do you think of this? And I read it and it kind of fell flat for me, but I was like, I don't get it, and I saw words like God, alcoholic, powerless, and I was like, I don't know, dude. And so that began the conversation. I was like, I was like, if this is religious, like this isn't gonna work for me. And he was like, no, 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 that's not a thing. And he would explain why. And so, but I was super skeptical about it. I didn't think it was going to be something that helped me. But 30 years ago when I got sober, there was nothing else. And I reached a point of desperation where I was so desperately wanted to be sober. And I had shot all my angles and tried all my tricks, and I couldn't manage my drinking. And then I couldn't quit. I knew I needed to quit and I couldn't. And so I was super desperate to be sober. And Mitch kind of caught me right at the right time. And in that period of my life where I'd been trying to practice moderation, couldn't do it. And then finally, when I wanted to quit and couldn't do it, he was like, you need to try this. So I was like, well, there was not literally nothing else available. So I tried it. here
So
we are.
how did your skepticism get overcome at that time?
It was definitely in stages, and it was interesting. You were asking me about the process of writing the book. It was interesting to like go back and like sort of dig all that out, right? It's like, oh, well, how did I get past like the God thing? And I remember I write about Kimmers. Kimmers was my first sponsor, and she was a woman who remembered my name the second time she met me, and that was like a sign from higher power or whatever that she was probably the one. And I was like, I'm really worried about this God thing because if that's what this is, I'm not going to be able to do it because I rejected God a long time ago. I grew up in the church and I tried to be good. I really tried to be good, but there was I was experiencing sexual abuse at the time and my parents had divorced and I was acting out and I had really wanted to be good, but I just kept failing. And I decided that if I couldn't be good, I was going to be good at being bad, right? And kind of went that route and rejected all the ideas of God. But when I was like completely emotionally broken from alcohol, that was kind of was like, oh, please God help me. So I was kind of in this weird spot. And I told Kimmers all this, and she said, let's do a little exercise. So she handed me a notepad. She goes, on one side, I want you to write, two columns. On one side, write down all the things that you would want God to be. So powerful, loving, I'm the favorite, shit like that, energy, just like create, like all this stuff, positive stuff. And then she's like, okay, on the other side, write down all the things you wouldn't want God to be. And I was like, well, punishing or just all these negative things. And when I was done, she said, let me see your list. So I handed her my list and she tore it in half. And she handed me the positive side. And she's like, we're going to start with this. And I was like, that's it? She said, that's it. We're just going to start with what makes sense to you. Like she's like, it has to make sense to you. And I fancy myself like a science girl. So I needed like a god of evidence. And there was this idea that I kept hearing at meetings of run the experiment, like cause and effect, right? You take an action and then you experience the effect, right? And so she was like suggesting some things and she said, give it a shot. Don't trust me. Don't take my word. Run the experiment for yourself and come up with your own conclusions. And I started having these amazing experiences. And like trippy shit started happening where like things would happen like for my benefit that I couldn't have planned. And like this experience of synchronicity or things that were like kismet or like these coincidences. I had a friend say that coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous, which I thought was kind of cute. But
Albert
anyway, that's
Einstein, that. Albert Einstein said that. That was a quote from him. That's one of my favorite quotes in the
oh,
world.
is that right?
Yeah. That's
Oh
the
my God.
that I heard that in a meeting. Somebody said that quote in a meeting, and that was my turning point that completely changed my mind from being an atheist to being a believer.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's
Because I'd had a series of mind-blowing coincidences happen over the course of the last year.
right.
And and when they said that, I was like, oh my God. That for me was the turning point. It's interesting because that the point that you just talked about there. So the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book says that a higher power will solve your problem, essentially. It says that, this program is designed to introduce you to a higher power that will solve your problem. And the whole program is built around that point, essentially. So when people first come to the rooms and they see the word God on the wall, many of them are put off by that. I know that I almost ran away because of that one word. So how have you tackled that in the book? Considering that that is kind of well, as far as AA is concerned, that is the point of recovery, is to find this higher power that will solve your problem and then to kind of pass on that message. How did you deal with that? Because obviously it is a very big point of contention, isn't it?
It
For a lot
it
of
really
people.
is. Yeah, so there are three, I call them the three big trigger words. There's God, powerless, and alcoholic. And the solution for all three of those is really the same. It's about redefining what it means. And I was told early on that if you have a problem with God, chances are you have a problem with someone else's God, someone else's definition of what that means. And it really is sort of, it's like, let's set aside the word and get into practical actions. Like, what does that mean practically speaking? And so that's why they say, oh, God can be an acronym for group of drunks, great outdoors, whatever. Or they say, oh, you can, it's just not an issue. The idea is that the program gives you access to a higher power, and a higher power could be you and I together, right? Like I am very clear that when I'm emotional, it's like my amygdala takes my logical brain offline and I can't think clearly. Emotion colors my perspective and I can't see things clearly, right? That's like that saying that you can't read the label from inside the jar. When I'm emotional, I'm in the jar and I don't have perspective. And so you, not being emotional, can observe my situation and examine the facts and offer me a logical, rooted, grounded perspective, right? And that is a power greater than myself. Sometimes it's just important to start there with like, let's redefine some terms, like who gets to decide what God means? You do, right? And then what makes sense to you? Like, let's pretend there is a God and what would make sense to you, and then run the experiment. I'm not suggesting that you take my word or John's word. I'm saying run the experiment for yourself. And a lot of times, like I had a friend who's an atheist, and he said that he believes in principles, like there's a principle behind every step, and that he operates based on those principles of honesty, integrity, um, willing, like all the gratitude. And that's how he operates, practically speaking. And I'm like, oh, side note, that's God, but okay. But you do you, boo. And that's the thing, it doesn't matter because what we're if we're focused on the principles, if we're focused on taking action, then we invoke the law of cause and effect and you experience the effect.
Yeah.
So my position is the word isn't necessarily as important as like the mindset shift of you could redefine it, but then it's all about the actions you take
Yeah.
to get to the effect.
Yes. I like that.
And
And
having said that, after 30 years of practicing this way of life, I have had what people would call spiritual experiences,
yeah.
where I'm like, it is, and spiritual experiences are kind of funny because sometimes they are so personal to me and God that only me and God get it. Like I could tell you stories about an event that was so profound to me, and it would probably land flat for
Yeah.
you, like
That
rock my world.
that's what I always talk about. Um, is it's the word experience, isn't it? It's a spiritual experience. Like it's an experience of yours. It's not me telling you my story and then you going, oh yeah, I believe now. It's about you having your own experience. And
Yeah.
I've known some absolutely staunch. Well, I was a staunch atheist myself, so I'm one of those people that's completely done a 180. But I know some people over the last 10 years that have, really, really clung on to atheism, and then they've just had some undeniable experiences that have changed their perspective, and they don't, yeah,
Undeniable.
yeah, they don't try to explain it. They just know that they've had the experience. It's not like they're not then saying, okay, I believe in, the God of the Bible, or I believe in Allah, or like they're just like, okay, there is definitely something going on, that's bigger
Okay.
than me. And that's enough for them.
I will share one story that felt like a spiritual experience. I was asked to share at a 12-step meeting, and I have shared my story a lot, so I kind of have the same rundown. But this particular day when I was sharing my story, happened to mention my exact sobriety date, including the year, April 23rd, 94. It was my year. And I don't ever share that, but I always say a little prayer just before I start, like just speak through me and whatever you would have me say, whatever, just inspire me. I don't know, something like that. Lead my thinking. And so I see my very first sponsor was in this room, this gal, Marianne. And or maybe she was my second, I don't remember, but she was one of my one of my sponsors.
How
She
many have
came in.
you had?
I probably like in 30 years, probably like six, maybe. But anyway, in the beginning, I was kind of shuffling through a few.
Yeah, you get through a
Anyway,
few at the beginning.
yeah, I was changing so rapidly that I felt like I needed something different. Anyway, so
Yeah,
Marianne was there, and I don't remember what the topic was, but I called on her in the community that I was in, like the person that shares their story is called the chairperson,
yeah,
and they pick a topic and then they call on people.
yeah.
And Marianne was there. And so I called on Marianne, and she goes, I would like to pass my time to Tammy. And Tammy begins to share. The story always makes me cry. Tammy begins to share that she needed to come to an AA meeting that day because she was on the way to her husband's funeral and that she was afraid that she might get loaded. And that's why she needed to be there that day and that she had asked for a sign that God was going to be with her. And as I shared my story, I shared my sobriety date. She goes, that was our wedding date.
Wow.
That was their wedding date. The day I was like, what is that? What is happening? Like, it felt undeniable to me. Like,
That is,
I still get choked up telling that story. And it was undeniable. Everybody in the room fell silent. And like, I still get chills thinking about it. And people were talking about that afterwards. Like, what just happened? Like,
well,
that was weird.
and this is the weird thing about it is that it's always the same. It's always God give me a sign, and then this mind-blowing
Yeah.
like coincidence, this
Coincidence.
synchronicity. I mean, you just hear these stories over and over and over and over. And I mean, and the thing is, if you're not in recovery, if you're not in the rooms, you don't hear these stories very often. But when you're in the rooms, you
Yeah.
hear them. You hear hundreds of them, and it's
Yeah.
like it slaps you in the face. And I say I've been saying this a lot recently. I mean, like you're talking about the word God and saying like higher power and stuff like that. Like I've probably for the last I don't know for 13 well for 14 years I've been saying higher power because I've just I'm still maybe a little bit hung up on the word God and
Yeah, and that's
yeah
fine.
yeah and and I don't want to offend people and all this kind of stuff. But more recently I've just been like it is like it's God. God is who I asked. God, he, she, it, whatever God is. God is who I asked for help, and
Mhm.
the help came. God is who I asked for the signs, and the signs come. And I've just started saying God because, there's just too much evidence for me that there is a God.
Yeah,
Just too much evidence. And I don't even know what that means. I mean that when I say the word God, I mean something is the creator. Something created this thing that we're in, that we call life.
yeah. There's some kind of loving presence. I have one more story for you. That it was like sort of undeniable. So my mother passed away and I had to clear out her house, yeah, I had to clear out all her things. And I would sit in the room where she died and just, I was just gutted. And I would just walk around the house being sad. And so we finally emptied out the entire house and I was doing like a walkthrough. And I just wanted to be in that room because that's where I experienced her presence last. And I was kind of looking through the drawers, making sure that everything was gone. And I asked for a sign. And I go, God, if my mom is here, if she loved me, if I don't know, I just show me a sign. And then this little voice came in, like, that's stupid. That's stupid. There's not going to be a sign or whatever. And I was like, whatever. And so I was like looking through some drawers, and then I opened this drawer, and there was this little tiny piece of glitter. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see this?
Yeah, I love you.
It says, I love you. I was like, what? And I was just, I just was leveled. I miss my mom so much even today. And this is like, so I keep this on my desk as a little reminder that when I ask for help, help comes. And sometimes I just ask, sometimes I'm like, I feel so thick today, God. I please make it obvious. Show me a sign. Please make it obvious. I'm so confused.
Yeah.
You know, that was like another little moment where I was like, okay, all right. And then I still doubt. I still doubt.
Oh, that, I was just gonna say, I feel we're so blessed that we've had these experiences and that we continue to have these experiences, but the doubt is always creeps in and like I
Yeah.
think I think that's the reason why I'm trying to be more overt about the way that I talk about God and my relationship with God and my just my faith, because if I don't talk about it, I kind of almost forget that that is true for me, and dependent on the company that I'm keeping. I mean, I don't talk about unless I'm in recovery, unless I'm in a meeting or speaking to somebody like yourself. I'm not having conversations about God and coincidences and, spirituality. I'm having day-to-day conversations with people, and it's not something that really comes up that often. Um, and even if it does, I'm very mindful. Like when I'm working, for example, I mean, I work with people that are just not spiritual at all. It's just not, they're not that way inclined. And I'm mindful of that. So I don't kind of like push my
Yeah.
thoughts and feelings on them, and even when they make comment, like one individual that I work with in particular is like a staunch atheist, and he'll make quite derogatory comments about religion, about God and spirituality and stuff, and I don't push back, and I'm kind of like, I, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I just don't necessarily feel the need to. I just kind of like feel as though I'm comfortable with it. But then at the same time, maybe I should talk more about it. Maybe it is something that I should be more proud of, because ultimately then maybe it gives other people the confidence to talk about it as well. I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
I think it depends on the scenario. Like, when I wrote the book, I had some conversations with people about being open-minded or about 12 step. And if somebody is so committed to their position that sometimes people are just so committed to their position, there is no discussion.
Yeah.
There's no like, and so I don't have those discussions with those people. On the other hand, I'm not so sure it's appropriate to be like checking out at the grocery store and being like, "Hey, what's your idea of God?" You know what I mean? Like, so like there's a time and place, but I love the idea of um having conversations about God because you're right. As you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, other than in recovery in my day to day, like we're not religious, so we don't go to church. We were just having conversations like it's Sunday. I was like, oh yeah, we don't do that. Like where else do you find community and have a forum where you could discuss God, you know? And so I think it would be interesting unless you do like a book study of some kind or just like have a gathering of some kind, like you invite some friends to talk about different books or different ideas or whatever, that it just doesn't come up. It's a very intimate and personal topic.
Yeah.
So,
I'm the same as that. And it can almost sometimes it can feel a bit uncomfortable because if I'm talking to somebody about God and I don't know what their interpretation of God. So let's say I'm talking to somebody who's overtly a Christian.
yeah,
Let's say they're a Catholic, for example. What they're talking about and what I'm talking about are two completely different things. So
yeah.
so then I'm a bit kind of mindful of like I don't want to necessarily agree with what that person's saying because I probably don't. Does that make sense?
Well, I was just telling you before we hit record that I had a conversation with somebody who is very like, I'm in the US and there's very like red and blue and I'm kind of purple. And to be honest, like I don't really fit into either side, to be honest, fully. But this gal I was talking to is very red, very Christian, very but she and I still had a lot of things in common because I love the teachings of Jesus. I typically just don't like people who like Jesus because I love me some Jesus. I just don't because I think a lot of his teachings have been so misinterpreted.
Yeah,
Like the message that I didn't get about Jesus until I got sober was he was all about forgiveness, and I needed some forgiveness.
yeah,
I needed to give it to myself. I needed to give it to the people I thought that had wronged me. But anyway, so even this gal and I, who like she's a super trumper, and I am not, to put it mildly. And even she and I were able to talk about love is going to be the answer. Love is the answer for healing. It's not going to be about debating and it's about trying to understand rather than be understood.
yeah.
And it all sort of comes back. I think even in different religions, I think mostly, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think mostly we can all agree on love, kindness and love, and at the bare minimum. So even though she and I were come from very different mindsets, we actually agree on a lot more than we disagree on. We agree on the important things. But you're right, like God isn't something that I feel like I talk about enough with until I have a friend like you to get into it with.
Well, I mean, it's good. It's okay to disagree, isn't it? And like you said, I think the best thing in any conversation is to try and find a bit of common ground, but then acknowledge that, there's bound to be differences, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay in any with any topic. It's just such a loaded topic, and because the world is now just, I don't know about you, but I just think everything's just so weird. Like everything's
So
so
weird.
weird now, and there's just so much there's so much nuance to the whole religion and spirituality thing, and good and
Yeah.
evil, and like demonic, and all this other stuff that comes up, and I'm just like, I don't really know where to go with that. Like I'm just kind of like, I don't. Yeah, I think I don't I think I'm not really willing to go down too far down the track of religion in my own
Mhm.
life. Like you said, you're not really, you don't live in a religious household, neither do I. I don't go to church. I don't practice any particular religion. I have a very intimate relationship with my own higher power
Yeah.
that I call God because it's just kind of like the easiest word to use. Um,
Right.
and that's about as far as it goes, really, and after that, I'm like, I'm just trying to do my best as a husband, a father, an employee, and just trying to help people as best as I can. You know, I can't really do much more than that. I'm trying not to upset people as well. I'm
Yeah.
becoming more mindful about how I get my opinions across.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah, I think anytime we can say, you know, what works for me is what I've experienced, you know, things like that. It's not like those aren't blanket statements for everyone. One of the other things I like to talk about when I talk about God is where does God live, right? Like one of the things that I've heard people sort of that are anti 12 step is that, oh, I don't want to abdicate responsibility
yeah,
to like higher power, or there's this perception, it's like because you're turning your will and your life over to the care of a higher power. And I was like, well, let's talk about what that is, right? So if you know, where is God? So and for me, my experience is that God is inside me and I am led through my heart. Like I call it like the inner compass, right? And at a gut level, I know if I'm God's will for me is peaceful, even if it's difficult. Like I've had to let go of some friendships and it was really hard to let go, but the end result was peace. So I knew that was the right decision for
Yeah.
me, right? And so God leads me through love, and I feel it through my inner compass. So I'm not abdicating responsibility to something outside myself. I'm being led by paying attention to what feels right at a heart gut level.
Yeah. Which coincidentally is what the major religions of the world teach as well, isn't it?
Well, I kind of grew up in the Christian religion where it was like a sky daddy. Like,
But that's the corruption of the message, though. The actual true message is that it is within you,
it's
deep
in
down within
touch.
you, isn't it? But
And it's the feeling of love.
the human corruption of the message is that there is a sky daddy, and that you've got to do all these things to pay homage to it. But
Yeah,
that's
God is jealous
yeah,
and all
yeah,
this nonsense. Yeah, and yeah, so it's also very common to think the solution to our problems are outside of us. Like something out there is going to fix me in here.
yeah,
I pray to this God that's out there in the universe. So it could actually be true. Like God is out there, but God is also in here.
yeah,
Right? When I think of God as being omnipresent, that's kind of like God is. It's like God is in everything and is everywhere, including space. And there's something about sort of, going from this myopic self-centered view to like this universal view that changes my perspective in a healthy way.
yeah,
It creates a sense of awe and wonder that, it sort of helps me to get right-sized, so
yeah,
to speak, so that I am moving through the world in a more balanced way.
yeah. And you can have that experience as well through either psychedelics or meditation. You can actually experience that,
Mm.
And
Yeah.
again, it's like the experience of when you experience that and you go, oh my God, well, I've had that experience now. So therefore, all these things that I've read about this omnipotence, oh, well, that's true because I've experienced it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading this synopsis of a book called Awe. And it's like, well, how do we cultivate this sense of awe? We get it through music, through nature, those serendipitous events. And it does add depth and dimension to life because I can go through life and it starts to become feeling kind of flat.
Mm,
Right. Just go through the motions. There's always like a lot of negative input coming in, negative feelings that arise from the past that have been unresolved, social media, news that I really try to limit like news. I don't actively watch news channels, but I do participate a little bit on social media just because of the nature of my work. Um, and so anyway, we do get a lot, and we know people and difficult things are happening. So we're constantly being brainwashed with all these negative messages. It's easy. That's when life starts getting flat. Like we
yeah,
start like recoiling and retracting and constricting. But you're right, like things like psychedelics and meditation sort of do a reset where it kind of breaks you out of your limited thinking
yeah,
and limited belief set. And I would argue that ideas about religion or spirituality, if you are anything we reject, really is a symptom of a limiting belief. And I write about this in the book in the recovery resistance piece where it's like, and I am aware that like I don't go to church because I had some bad experiences, and I'm like, oh, that's a limiting belief I have limiting beliefs about religion where I know that there are, millions and millions of people who get benefit from it. I just find it easier to get that sort of awe and wonderment other ways. But there is a little piece of me that's like, oh, I kind of miss the community and like a place to go to talk about it and you know what I mean, and talk about God and be reminded that like we have other ways of accessing that stuff. But it's really interesting to occasionally try to deconstruct your own thinking to try to find out where the limits are. Because I don't know about you, but I'm all about the limitless life. I like I like to participate in like potentiality and sort of explore those ideas as sort of the antidote to the the weight and the challenges of life sometimes.
Well, I experienced life exactly how you just described it there. A lot of the time, I find it difficult. Like, it can feel very heavy, like you said, and I find that I'm easily affected by the negativity, like you said, on social media and the news. I have to do all those things that you said. I have to limit the use of that stuff, and if I don't limit it, then I notice that I start to get very negative thinking and that feeling of heaviness. So, to counteract all that stuff, like I need to keep doing the stuff that I know works for me. I need to do plenty of exercise. I need to like do my meetings. I need to speak to people. But I think, like this, they say that the road gets narrower as time goes by in recovery. And the easiest way of describing that is simply that, don't take your foot off the gas, basically. Like, as time goes by, you've got to do as much, if not more, of the things that you know will keep you well. Because if you let your foot off the gas, then that negativity comes thick and fast. That's my experience, absolutely. Um,
Do you know the other part of that phrase, though? The path gets narrower, but the view gets better.
yeah, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's the
yeah,
other half.
yes, and you have you definitely have an increase. I mean, you have a better perspective on life in general, don't you? And you know as well that this too shall pass, that things will get better, fairly quickly. Even if you're having a bad day, it's probably going to last a day, maybe a couple of days, and then it'll kind of, it'll be relieved. But I just struggle sometimes with the fact of feeling low, of just not feeling on an even keel. So, um, and and sometimes having to force myself to do the things that I know work for me. Like today, for example, I could have had a nap today, this afternoon. I could have had about a half an hour, 40-minute nap while my wife was out with Alice. I chose to meditate instead, and I'm really glad that I made that decision because I knew that if I slept, I would probably feel groggy afterwards.
Mhm.
I knew if I meditated, I would probably get a bit of energy for the afternoon, and that is kind of like my peaceful time with my higher power, and it worked. It was a good decision. But yesterday and the day before, I made bad decisions around meditating, So it's like sometimes it's kind of like two steps forward, one step back with this stuff. Um, and it's frustrating sometimes that, that all these years in recovery, like it doesn't matter how long it is, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever, all these years in recovery, and you think, I feel just as bad as I did 10 years ago sometimes,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying the exact thing that I needed to be able to launch into this whole thing about this solution that I found.
Good.
I, I started exploring internal family systems a few years ago. I heard a Tim Ferriss episode, and he was comparing internal family systems to his experiences with psychedelics. He's been very open about his experiences with psychedelics that were super fascinating. And he had Dick Schwartz on, who was the creator of the internal family systems model. And the basic model is that it's sort of we have like a triangle. We have a few parts to us. So there's the manager parts that sort of control us. That I have one that's like very hard charging, driving to help me to get stuff done, right? And then I have this other part, they call these other parts firefighters. And they're the ones that sort of step in to extinguish like the deep emotions are out of control. That's for me, it's like a distractor. And then underneath all of that, these protectors, firefighters, managers are serving to protect the exile. And an exile is typically a younger version of yourself that's been like frozen in time. I have all these younger parts of me that I was expected to be more responsible. I wouldn't say I was parentified as a child, but I had way too much responsibility for my life way too early. I was expected. I remember my mom, I give you girls a lot of freedom. It's like I didn't have the skill or capacity or context, maturity, perspective to handle that kind of responsibility. And I would get myself into these situations and I would get hurt. Right. So one of the things I did some trauma therapy a couple of years, a little over a year ago, and what came up for me is that my childhood experience was that I was not safe. Like I had a couple of very near death experiences, and I was detached from all that until I did the trauma therapy. And so the way I use that information is, oh, now I'm aware that I have all these little parts of me that have been exiled. That it's like, oh, I can't deal or cope with that pain. So we're just going to bury that shit. And so I tend to operate at the higher level. But what happens, how this plays out for me is like I have these repeating patterns. So I have like this thing with money. Like I think that money is going to be the answer to all my problems. That's just gonna, if I could just have enough more, but you know how more is, right? Like there is no such thing, like there's always more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's never like enough.
The disease of more.
The disease of more. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
it with drinking too. So I tend to have like workaholic tendencies. I've been sober a long time, and that doesn't mean I'm sane, right? So I will get into these modes of like, you know what? I'm just gonna work really hard. I'm doing this kind of with this project that I'm doing. It's called the Inner Compass Program, and I feel really inspired, but I need to be very careful because like my manager wants to take over. And I will work like crazy hours. I'll stop doing my care. I'll start slacking off on that. And, my emotional state suffers. And so the idea is that, like, I have an inner child that's like, oh my God, you're going to make us do this thing again, where you put us in these positions to fail and feel humiliated and feel shame. Right. That's what was my experience when I was young. I would get myself into these situations that I couldn't really handle, and I would experience failure, shame, and I would get hurt. And so so I'm pushing the boundaries, and they say imposter syndrome is when you are, stretching, like you're trying to learn a new skill or do something new. Everybody who's pushing hard enough is going to experience imposter syndrome, right? But what happens to me is it triggers all my exiles, like, oh my God, here we go again. And so the firefighter, like if I'm all out of balance, the firefighter comes in and and the way it works for me is it distracts me. I'll start doom scrolling TikTok for hours at a time. I'll get close to my goal and sabotage because I think deep down I don't believe I can handle the responsibility that comes with success. All this fear of success stuff. To me, in my mind, I've linked success and money with responsibility and failure, humiliation, right? So my internal is my limiting beliefs that are so deeply ingrained. And so I have to do a lot of work to be very conscious of what's going on for me. Where am I feeling stress in my body? How do I feel towards that part? Who's pissed at it? Who wants to get rid of it? It's like this manager part needs to sort of step aside so I can deal with the exile underneath and go back and do like some inner child work so that the little one feels, unburdened and safe. And when that little one is calmed down, like the firefighter doesn't need to come in. And firefighters are interesting because if your house is on fire, you call a firefighter, they pour water on top of the house. It puts the flames up, it also destroys the house. And so addiction can be seen as a firefighter, right? Somebody's in emotional pain. That was my case. I was in emotional pain and I didn't have any kind of coping skills. And so alcohol and drugs were the thing that I used to put out the flames of my emotional turmoil. And it did, but then it caused all these other problems.
Mm.
Right. And so that's kind of like in the IFS terms, that's sort of the dynamic of the firefighter and addiction. But now I've been sober for a long time. My stuff still comes up. It just comes up in different ways. And for me, it like manifests through work and goals and achieving, wanting to make money and doing these things. So I stumbled upon this sort of subset of IFS called polarized parts work. And it's a process of actually identifying the two parts. It's like I have a part of me that wants to run a successful program. I want to help people. I'm like super excited about this process. I think, holy shit, this is the thing that's going to close the gap between knowing what to do and actually taking action. Right? You described a scenario of polarized parts where you're like, oh, I know I should have meditated, but I made bad decisions. Well, the bad decisions are typically the firefighter coming in to distract, right? That because that's our normal way of being, right?
Mm,
And so this is like a whole new, and this is all sort of rooted in the default mode network. It's your brain's operating system. But even deeper than that, it's like your how your emotions and your intellect all work together. And so this process that I'm putting together with some experts is about polarized parts work. So the part of me that wants to have a successful, valuable, useful, transformative class. And then there's this other part of me that is afraid of the responsibility, the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt, the all the limiting beliefs I have around money that are going to sabotage this thing. And so I created, so there is this gal, Cece Sykes, she works for the internal family systems, and she's sort of this expert on polarized parts. And so using some of her teachings, I created like a free PDF that people can get at innercompassprogram.com. And it's a way to start the process of negotiating between these two parts that have competing needs. And the competing needs is what creates internal resistance. And so it's so interesting because when I was writing the book, I was writing this part about recovery resistance, and I kind of stumbled on this solution, and now I'm obsessed. It's like it brings me so much like energy thinking, oh my gosh, this is the thing. And I've been doing this work for myself. And I feel like as you know, I'm going into territory that's uncomfortable for me because I'm really stretching outside my comfort zone and all the fears and the self-doubt and like my urge to self-sabotage is coming up. But because I have this process, I'm able to do my internal work, follow the internal compass, and quiet down these parts. But it's so amazing because it's bringing up all this old stuff that I really wasn't in touch with, like when I was doing this it's a journaling exercise. I was like, what is here for me today? And I remembered being like 6 or 7 years old, standing in the hallway at my mother's house, and I could hear my mother and my sister going at it. And my mother was, when I was young, she was, what I would say she was verbally abusive, let's say. And I remember feeling like, I'm glad it's my sister and not me that's on the hot seat, and then instantly feeling guilty that I was thinking that, like, so all the shame and guilt kicked in, and then wanting to help my sister, but feeling powerless to do anything about it. And it feels like that is what has spurred me through my whole life. I'm a helper, right? And that has spurred my whole life wanting to help others because I'm trying to solve this need that that little 6-year-old just couldn't resolve. And so,
what's the so what is the kind of ultimate goal of the work? Like, so once you have kind of resolved these conflicting parts, what will be the outcome of that?
so the outcome is that that little exiled part is feeling safe, so that I'm not triggered by the stressful events. Stress will trigger my younger parts.
Okay.
And then the firefighter comes in and starts all the distraction bullshit, the self-sabotage.
So you'll be able to, so essentially like rather than that happening, you'll actually just be able to do the task at hand.
It ends the self-sabotaging behaviors.
Yeah.
So I'm in the middle of the pattern. But because I'm doing this work, I'm instead of repeating the pattern, I'm blazing a new trail.
Yeah, you're changing that behavior.
Yeah. So I am feeling my feelings. I am feeling the self-doubt. I am feeling the stress of, being under deadline to getting these tasks completed and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with the stress. I've invested a lot of money, so and I need to do paid ads and things like that. And there's some things I need to learn. It's very stressful. It's a lot to manage.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for me to manage the stress and still make progress and still take action so that I can get the results, right? We go back to cause and effect. But it's all about recognizing patterns, resolving internal resistance so I can take the actions consistently so that I can get the result at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I massively relate. I often feel when we have conversations that like you're like the female version of me.
I know.
It's like
I know. I love
we,
that too.
I do relate massively to everything that you just said, and something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and this is like a cyclical thing for me, is like what is it that I'm trying to achieve? Like, and it's almost like what you said. There's like it's kind of like I fancy myself as a bit of an entrepreneur
You are.
who's never actually gone far enough to do something that um hasn't achieved what I'm capable of achieving because I always stop. So, as an
Yeah.
example, like with the podcast, I've never invested enough time into it to make it bigger than what it is. I wrote a book and I got it published, and then that was where it ended. I never invested any time into marketing it, into selling myself as an author, or doing any of the things that were suggested by the publishers, because I was like, well, I've achieved what I set out to achieve, and I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be I don't want to be known. I don't want to be anything. So there's always this kind of like, there's like a finalization that comes where I'm just like, well, I'm just happy. I'm just cool being Mr. Nobody. I'm just like I'm okay just being me, and I don't necessarily want to put myself out there. But then there's still the drive there to put myself out there. So it's like I'm always at that
Big
conflict.
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have polarized parts. Yeah, and it's so interesting because on one hand, we are aware of the potentiality, right? There's no limits, right? On the other hand, there are ideas of like it's safer to just stay small, to not be like there's this, I was kind of sensing there was this little judgment about like, oh, people that are like wanting to be famous. And really this work that we're doing has nothing to do with us. Right. I heard this morning on this interview, this gal was talking about why she's an entrepreneur, and someone told her, "Who are you to let this gift go waste? Like there are people out there who need to hear this. This is about them. This is not about you."
Mm. Yeah,
Right.
that's kind of that's how I try to sell it to myself. But then I often think, am I just conning myself here? Like you must, when you sent me, when you sent the I don't know whether it was a message or
Self-doubt.
whether you posted it about, you said, oh, I've just applied for Theo Von's podcast
Oh
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pitched it. And I looked at it and I laughed because I'd literally done exactly the same thing about 2 days previous, and I was like,
I really am the female version of you.
and when I was doing it, I was thinking to myself, what would you even do? Even if he came back to you and said, "Yeah, come on my podcast," would you even go, like? Would you even do it? Like, who are you to be going on a podcast that is
Who
listened
are
to?
you not to? Who
I
are
know,
you
but
not to?
that's what I'm saying is that is the battle, isn't it? Within yourself, where you question why is it that and so long as the motive is I just want to have like this conversation. I want to have a conversation with you because A, I enjoy conversing with you, and B, when I put it up there on the internet, it might help one person, and that's wonderful. Like that, genuinely, if it helps one person, that's brilliant. And then anything after that is great. But what I could do is I could spend loads of effort. I could make loads of effort marketing this podcast, getting it out there to, across the internet so that more and more people hear it. And that's the bit that for some reason, I don't have the drive to do that. And I don't, can't quite work out why that is.
Well, I think the barrier is too high. This is just my opinion. But there are some steps in between do nothing and take, I think your words were take massive action and put in math. You know what I mean? Like, well, okay, that sounds exhausting to me. So maybe not that. But what if, what if we just break it down to little baby steps? Right? Like, what would be reasonable and sustainable and still be a step in the right direction? Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be about this. This is you and I are so much like this black and white thinking. Either I just inspired and take some action and then fuck off for a while, or I go balls out and do all the thing massive. I was like, oh no. Like
Yeah.
that sounded like an assault to my system just hearing your plan of that. No, thank you. Not interested.
Yeah,
So there
yeah.
yeah, so what if we broke that down to, and listen, I get the whole, if one person is helped, then my heart is full. Fuck that. How about we take this out to millions of people who are desperate to hear conversations about spirituality and solutions and, most of it is just about showing up.
Mm.
So it's like, what is reasonable for you? What is sustainable for you? Whereas like you've written books, like there's no reason why you couldn't start pitching yourself to all kinds of podcasts and
Yeah.
just like that, maybe that's your spiritual practice is to just have like an hour a week or 2 hours a week where you're having discussions about your books.
Mm.
That's
Then I think that when I, yeah, when I think about that, I think, well, that's what I did in the past. Like, that's not now. That's not what I'm doing right now. What
why not?
at the time that I published that book, that was my focus,
Yeah.
and that was like where I was at that time. And then things changed, and like my family became more important to me, and like other things just came into my life, and that all kind of like took a bit of a back seat. And
Yeah.
that's happened. Sorry, go on.
Which is fair, right? Like when you have young children, it's like you want to be there for that. You don't want so what we're talking about is balance.
Yeah,
How you where is the line? Where is the balance? Because what we also started talking about, what we started with was the frustration that we feel when it's like I'm in long-term recovery. I know better, but I don't take action. It's like that's a very common refrain from people in long-term
yeah,
recovery. It's like we have the knowledge, but we don't take action, and then we become frustrated with ourselves.
yeah,
I propose that it lies in your default mode network. Your brain is just operating on its regular thing.
yeah,
And I know you appreciate being like awareness to things like that's how we grow and evolve. But it's like becoming aware of these like limiting beliefs. It's like, where is this coming from? I would argue, I'm going to give you a shortcut and say there is a need for safety somewhere. You have a
yeah,
exile younger party that needs the safety. So it's like, how can we manage these parts? So that you're actually operating from your higher self, not allowing the manager, the firefighter, the exile to determine your next step. It's you. What do I want for my life now? What is the outcome that I'm looking for? I'm super goal oriented. What do you want? Like, what
Well,
is the vision that you would help you feel balanced, but like you're fulfilling your potential?
that's the thing that resonates the most with me is I'm the typical addict in the sense that it's all or nothing.
Mhm.
But over the past 15 years, I've definitely become more balanced, and I strive to, walk the middle path essentially. And, like, rather than doing jujitsu every night of the week, I do jujitsu 3 times a week, and I go to the gym a couple of times a week when I can fit it in. Now, that 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. Like, I'd have been in the gym every single day, twice probably, and like
Mm.
everything that I did, like, I don't, at the end of every day, I don't go to the shop and buy a pack of four ice creams and eat those four ice creams every day, like I used to in early recovery, like now I just have other addictions to chocolate and things that I'll eat every day, but nowhere near as much as I used to. So every single thing that I do has become more balanced. And with this podcast, for example, I used to, without fail, do a podcast every week or every couple of weeks. Now they've just ad hoc. I just do them whenever I can. Um, I used to post whenever a podcast went live, I'd post it on all the, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the platforms. And I don't always do that now, and these are the things that, like, for me, that's moderation, but it never then quite hits the highs of, like the thing is with all or nothing is when you balls out, as you said earlier, like when you're going all out, there's a buzz there, isn't there? There's like
Yes.
there's a buzz, and we like a buzz. Like we're the types of people that like a buzz.
I'm a
So
little bit of an alcoholic, so I may not be the best person to take advice from when it comes to work, but it seems that what I know for sure is that to make progress in any area, consistency is required. And even if, like in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about lowering intensity
yeah,
and staying committed. So, and I have listen, there are tools that can help with some of the distribution stuff, but I do think that consistency is really important. Things like a newsletter is more effective than distributing to a bunch of platforms because people typically don't if list they don't typically click on links to listen to the full episode. It's helpful, but like it's better to just be like, hey, download this free worksheet, and then you start, or you tell people if you want to get an email with a link to the latest episode, sign up for my newsletter or whatever.
yeah,
And newsletter is more effective, but consistency in the newsletter. But the idea of what we're talking about is reaching more people,
yeah.
right? Because there are people out there who are suffering, and we have ideas and solutions that would ease that suffering. And so it's about being smart about how you utilize your time. Like strategy, don't get me wrong, strategies and tactics are important, but until you address this is for me the missing puzzle piece that I have been searching for 30 years is this way to resolve internal resistance
Mm,
because that is what kind of keeps me going on a regular basis. It's important to know what the strategies and tactics are, but if you have so much internal resistance that you can't take action, like if the goal is too big, like you were taking with a massive doing all, but but if we scale it down and find something reasonable and we just take they say there's that idea that we overestimate what we can do in the short term and underestimate what we can do in the long term. And that's the thing that got me hooked to consistency. I started outsourcing, so I started changed my tactics and strategies a little bit, but solving the consistency thing for the podcast and doing the newsletter and stuff like that is what has really grown the podcast. But consistency is like super important. So it's like, how can I make it easy? Like, what if it were easy? Like
mm.
kind of answering those questions.
That
But
that kind of brings me back to, so right at the very beginning of the podcast, you talked about the three things in the book that are the main obstacles. So you said God,
well, there's three trigger words. It was God, powerless, and
powerlessness,
alcoholic.
alcoholism.
People who
Yeah,
want to label themselves an alcoholic. And there again, we're just redefining terms because I don't know if you feel this way, but like when I hear somebody say that they're an alcoholic, I go, oh, that's a badass. That is somebody who has seen the depths of hell and who has suffered and clawed their way out through one of the toughest things, which is self-examination, brutal honesty,
yeah, yeah,
and but with love and compassion.
yeah.
Right. So it's redefined. So again, it's like redefining the terms. But there's actually the three tenets of the book is that the steps are a worthy endeavor.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that if you do them, you'll stay sober forever. I'm not saying that you got to go to meetings forever. I'm just saying that they're a worthy endeavor.
yeah,
And the other tenet of the book is that the steps and meetings are two separate things.
yeah,
Like people talk about bad experiences they've had at meetings and people that they've met that have rubbed them the wrong way at meetings. The people are not the program, the steps are.
mm,
Steps and meetings are like soap and water, they work better together, right? But the people are often the thing that drive people away from the program.
yeah,
But there is a mindset shift there to be had in the sense of the people, like the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And it typically shows up with the people. The people will piss you off.
yeah,
But what I would challenge you, if you have courage, if you can lean into that anger, the anger is typically covering up some sort of sadness. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's covering something else that's harder to feel. And if you can get to what's underneath all that, there's some healing there that happens. And so these people that pissed you off, these are your teachers. These are your actual healers because they'll make if you can submit to the process, it takes courage. I hate to use this word, but sobriety is not for pussies.
yeah.
Like you sorry, I rarely use that word, but sometimes it just has the right impact. Um, but if you have the courage to do the self-examination and explore where the pain is, if we can invite love and compassion, that pain gets healed and those people stop triggering you. We are less affected by the people in our lives. And I heard this really interesting analogy. Marianne Williamson wrote, used to do lectures on the Course in Miracles, and she used this example of how a gemologist will take two rough amethysts and put them in a rock tumbler together. And that amethyst will knock off the rough edges and they come out smooth. And so you have these beautiful gems, right? That's how we are. We go into these meetings and we bump into all these people that rub us the wrong way, so to speak. We think it's a bad thing. It's not because they're rubbing off our rough edges.
Yeah.
And if you can submit to the process, we come out shiny, happy people most
Well,
of the time.
that's life in general, isn't it? I mean, if you can be comfortable being yourself with anybody that you come into contact with, then you've cracked it, really.
Some of my biggest teachers were at work, people that were really challenging at work. They weren't in
Yeah,
the program. They were
yeah,
just people. And I remember that I was in this one job that was so hard. This gal was just, she made my life miserable. She was like a trainer, and I was sort of under her thumb, and she made my life miserable. It forced me to go deep on all my spiritual practices, my law of attraction, manifestation stuff. I was calling in God, I was watching like these listening to like spiritual lectures all day long. And at the end of that, I ended up, through a series of crazy circumstances, I ended up getting my dream job at Hewlett Packard, HP, tripling my income that year. It was wild, but it was because of her. I was so in so much pain because of her. I had to do so much work to counterbalance all the pain I was feeling that I was taking all this action and it got me like this crazy result because of her. I'm grateful to her now.
yeah.
I still think she's a bitch, but I'm so grateful for her role in my life.
Thanks, bitch.
Thanks, bitch. Love you. Thank you.
What what about the powerlessness thing then?
So the powerlessness thing is sort of we talked about it a little bit in the sense of, people see this word powerlessness, but they're not, it's a complete phrase. It's powerless over alcohol,
Yeah,
right? People get stuck on powerless. What? No, it's over alcohol. And what I would argue is that anybody that ingests alcohol sets off a cascade of chemical reactions in their body that produce a certain effect. It's predictable, it's reliable, and that's why we do it, right? Because we're expecting the result. However, I would argue that once you kick off that chain of events, that chemical reaction, you can't at will walk it back, right? You are powerless to walk that shit back. Like you have to, the only way through the forest is through type of thing. And for some of us, the the thought of more kicks in, the obsession of more kicks in, and that was my experience. So when I ingest alcohol, it kicks off more. It's an obsession, and I have no ability. I am powerless. Once it starts, I am powerless to predict when it's going to end. I just don't have any idea. And so for me, that's kind of the idea of powerlessness. It's not I'm a powerless human being. And I think that's what it keeps a lot of people out. Like I work with a lot of high achiever alcoholics who have a lot of stuff. They have big roles, big jobs, families, lots of responsibility. They have a lot of stuff. And they think I can't be an alcoholic. Look at all my stuff. Look at this role that I have. Look at this job that I have. I can't possibly be an alcoholic. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what does it do to you on the inside? How is your heart? Where is your peace? How are your relationships? Right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about powerless over alcohol. Our lives become unmanageable. Could be your relationship, your personal life to yourself is unmanageable.
So
So it,
sorry, in the context of the book, you're just focusing on that on alcohol rather because obviously like if you've been around recovery for long enough, people talk about they'll take that powerlessness a step further, won't they? And they'll say I'm powerless over people, places, and things,
it's just bullshit.
which yeah, well, it is, and it depends on your
So
perception, doesn't it?
yeah.
Really, because
So, but I
I
put it
think
in the context of we don't control people.
yeah,
We have influence.
yeah,
We have influence. Like we've all had that experience where you walk into a room and you could cut the tension with a knife, right? Some people are going out and you walk in and everyone stops talking, but you can feel it, right? You know, you have a good group of people and then somebody new comes in and they ruin it for everybody. They have influence. Right. You could be, I'm sure you've had this, you've told me you've had experiences where somebody comes in and says something to you that changes the game for you. That quote somebody delivered, they had influence over your life. So we're not talking about control, we're talking about influence. So that's the distinction that I make in the book is that we are powerless over there are certain things that we are absolutely powerless over. I'm powerless over COVID. Like I couldn't control it, but I did have influence over how I responded to it.
yeah. I mean, I think we're probably singing from the same hymn sheet in the sense of like my understanding of it is that. I am powerless over, like, I'm powerless over the weather. I'm powerless over you. I don't have any control over you. Like, I'm powerless over people in the sense that I don't control that. Like, everything will be as it is, and I don't have power over those things. However, I
Control.
have sovereign power over my own actions, and that's the only thing that's important at the end of the day. Like, I only need to have the power over what I do and don't do. And when it comes to addiction, I do actually have the power to say yes or no to picking up a substance or, enacting a behavior. But as you said, the minute I engage in that thing, so the minute I did make the decision to pick up the alcohol, then I'm powerless over the alcohol. Then I'm powerless over the drugs. Then I'm powerless over the gambling if I choose to go on the slot machine. Whatever it is. That's my understanding. So I think that's pretty much the same, really.
Yeah, yeah. And with this lens of, these, internal parts that we have now, I feel like I have a deeper understanding of the whole process because, while I still may, shop too much on Amazon or work too much or doom scroll on TikTok, like check out on social media, watch too much Netflix. Like these are all the things. They certainly are a lot lesser than I used to, but now I recognize, oh, I'm having a feeling that I'm trying to avoid. So now the internal dialogue that I have towards myself is a lot more compassionate.
Yeah.
Like, I get it now. I have a relationship with all these little parts, and I call them my littles. And when my littles are afraid, that's when I start doing shit like working too much, scrolling on TikTok or eating shitty food, or do you know what I'm saying? Like now I can recognize what's happening
Yeah.
and I have more compassion. And so that the inner critic doesn't start chirping up, going, oh, it doesn't trigger me into some kind of shame spiral.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of last thing, because to bring it full circle, last thing that I was going to ask you really about that was, so obviously you've started doing this work and creating this new program. Is that, because that's quite deep stuff that you're talking about there. Is that addressed in the book, or have you just kind of like touched the surface with that in the book and then,
I just touched the surface in the
yeah,
book.
because I was going to
Really,
say, 'cause it sound, sorry, go on.
the intro is really like about limiting beliefs.
Yeah, yeah,
Like because sobriety is sort of like crisis management. We need to solve the crisis of addiction first.
yeah,
And then and that's when like life opens up, right? It's like, well, what do you want? What do you want to create with your life? And that's when things get really interesting. But that's just the beginning. Like
yeah,
solving the drug and alcohol problem is just the beginning. And then life is like all possibilities open up after that. But it's so important to be like, what are your limiting beliefs? And like just start the process of like connecting with these inner parts. And it does sound like deep work, but I created this worksheet that starts the process of like, how do you connect with this resistance that you feel? How do
yeah,
you negotiate with these parts that you have? Right? So that you can take action on the knowledge that you already have and stop beating yourself up for when we have like these shortcomings,
yeah.
right? When we do act out, how do we bring compassion into the picture instead of shame spiraling and criticism and self-criticism and all that?
Do you think that you'll reach a place in the future where you will either be able to completely resist the craving to do the things that you use as like your medication these days, like the shit food and the Netflix and that kind of thing? Or do you think that that will always be there and you'll just become more compassionate towards yourself?
Yeah, the latter, I think, is the case because I feel like, have you ever read the Julia Cameron book, The Artist's Way, where she talks about creativity is the creator's will for us? So, like, I feel like when I'm learning and pushing and growing and being creative, that's when like I'm in flow, and that's when I feel alive and like productive, and so my tendency is to grow and evolve in different ways. And so if I'm growing, I'll always be pushing the boundaries that lead me to a place of feeling like an imposter, right? I'll always be pushing the boundaries, which will call up, stress. And when I feel stressed, that's when my parts get activated. But I see this as a good thing because as I am growing and evolving and all this stuff comes up and I'm working with it, I'm also sharing it with others and my lessons can be a benefit to somebody else. I love my teachers, right? They shortcut the process for me a little bit. The idea of the apprentice and the master is that the master helps the apprentice progress faster. And so I love the teachers and like who am I not to pass on all the things that I've learned from all these amazing teachers? Right? It's like I will be saying it in a voice in my time and age that will be translated. It's like the modern language that we have now. I'm not saying anything new. I'm
No?
just saying it. I'm just saying it in my way, in
Yeah,
my language.
yeah.
And that will benefit somebody that's like me who didn't know.
Beautiful as always. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I love our chats.
Thank you. Me too. Well, good luck with the book anyway. I hope it's a raging success and the new program. And I'm sure we'll have another conversation at some point next year. to see how things.
Next year's not that far away.
No, I know. So yeah, have a lovely Christmas and New Year, and yeah, I will. I'll speak to you again.
You too. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.